In April 1945, the war in Europe was almost over. But for Hitler's family, the nightmare was just beginning. They weren't generals, they weren't soldiers, and most had never even held a weapon. But they carried his blood, and in the ruins of Nazi Germany, that was enough to make them enemies. What happened to them next is a story few people know, and even fewer survived to tell. On April 30th, 1945, deep underground in a bunker in Berlin, Adolf Hitler took his own life as Soviet forces moved into the city. His body, along with Eva Braun's, was quickly burned by his staff. A week later, on May 7th, Germany officially surrendered. But the end of the war didn't bring peace. It left cities destroyed, millions without homes, and a country in total collapse. Right after the war, the Allies didn't just go after Nazi officers and leaders. They also started looking into Hitler's family. Even distant relatives were questioned. Under laws used by the Nazis themselves, whole families could be punished just for being related to someone accused of crimes. And now, those same rules were coming back around. As American and Soviet troops moved across Germany and Austria, everything fell into chaos. Roads were destroyed, trains stopped running. People had no food, no shelter, and no idea what came next. If someone had the name Hitler, or was even connected to him by blood, they were suddenly in danger. Some were hunted down, others arrested on the spot. In May 1945, Soviet soldiers captured 5 of Hitler's first cousins: Maria, Johann, and Eduard Schmidt, plus Maria's husband, Ignaz Goppensteiner, and their son, also named Adolf. Another relative, Johann Jr., was also taken. The Soviets accused them of supporting Hitler's war against Russia. 3 of them died in prison over the next few years. Johann Jr. was the only one released after 10 years. At the same time, American forces were searching for any other family members. The first they found was Hitler's only full sister, Paula. Born in 1896 in Austria, Paula Hitler was the youngest of 6 children born to Alois and Clara Hitler, and the only one who survived into adulthood alongside her older brother Adolf. As children, they weren't especially close, but Paula remained loyal to him throughout his life, even as his political power grew. Unlike many of Hitler's early supporters, Paula never joined the Nazi Party or held a public role. She worked in low-level office jobs and kept a low profile. During the Nazi years, she used the false surname Wolf, a name Adolf himself often used as an alias. This allowed her to move more freely without drawing attention to their connection. During the final days of the war, Paula was living near Berchtesgaden, the site of Hitler's mountain retreat. On May 26, 1945, U.S. forces arrested her and brought her in for questioning. She was held in a facility in Berchtesgaden and later moved to Munich for more formal interrogation by American military intelligence. Over the course of several weeks, Paula answered questions about her brother, his personality, and his private life, but investigators found no evidence that she had been involved in Nazi operations or crimes. She was eventually released, likely in July 1945, and allowed to return to civilian life. After her release, Paula lived in Salzburg, Austria, under her real name. She applied for a pension but was denied by the Austrian government, which didn't consider her a victim of war. Without financial support or property, she had little to fall back on. She briefly worked as a secretary in a small insurance office, but was forced to leave the job after coworkers discovered who she was. The Hitler name followed her everywhere. Over time, Paula became more isolated. She never married or had children. In her final years, she lived in a small, modest apartment in Berchtesgaden. She relied on donations from a few former Nazi supporters and the little she could save from small jobs. She died on June 1st, 1960, at the age of 64, completely alone. She was buried in the Bergfriedhof Cemetery under her full name. Her quiet, difficult life after the war reflected what many of Hitler's relatives would go through. But Paula had at least tried to stay distant from politics. The same couldn't be said for Hitler's half-sister, Angela. Angela Hitler, born on July 28, 1883, in Braunau am Inn, Austria. She was the second child of Alois Hitler and his second wife, Franziska Matzelberger, making her Adolf Hitler's half-sister. Unlike other family members, Angela had a more direct presence in Hitler's personal life during his early rise to power. In 1903, she married a civil servant named Leo Raubal and had 3 children, Geli, Leo Jr., and Elfriede. After her husband died in 1910, Angela struggled financially for several years. But things changed in the mid-1920s when Adolf invited her to join his household as a housekeeper and companion at his retreat in Obersalzberg near Berchtesgaden. Living in the Berghof residence, Angela managed the house and kitchen and oversaw staff. During this time, she enjoyed special privileges that few others in Hitler's circle had. She had access to him during both his private and political life, and likely heard conversations and details that remained unknown to outsiders. However, her relationship with Adolf began to deteriorate after the arrival of her daughter, Geli Raubal, who moved into the house around 1929. Gurley and Hitler developed a very close and controversial bond, which Angela found increasingly disturbing. He was 19 years older than her and had become very possessive of her, though he paid for her education and accompanied her to events. Friends and party members noticed how controlling he became, limiting her friendships, social life, and even forbidding her to pursue a singing career in Vienna. By 1931, the relationship had become tense. Gurley wanted more freedom and expressed a desire to leave Munich. Hitler refused. On September 18th of that year, she was found dead in his apartment with a gunshot wound to her chest. The pistol belonged to Hitler. The official ruling was suicide, but the incident sparked decades of speculation. Some believed she was trying to escape his emotional grip. Others suspected that Hitler's jealousy played a role. The scandal caused significant damage to his reputation in the early 1930s, just as he was gaining national attention in Germany. He reportedly fell into a deep depression and withdrew from public appearances for several weeks. Even after becoming Germany's leader, Hitler kept a portrait of Gurley in his home and mentioned her rarely. Those who knew him said he never emotionally recovered from her death. Some historians believe this loss contributed to his increasingly cold and distant personality. However, Angela was devastated and blamed Hitler for her daughter's death, believing that his obsession and strict control had pushed Gurley to despair. After this tragedy, Angela left Hitler's home and broke ties with him. She later married a man named Professor Martin Hamitsch, taking the name Angela Hamitsch. Though she never publicly condemned the Nazi regime, she quietly withdrew from politics and refused to participate in any Nazi activities. By the time World War II ended in 1945, Angela was living in Dresden, which was heavily bombed by Allied forces in February of that year. After losing her home in the raids, she moved to a rural part of East Germany and kept a low profile. Despite her close past connection with Hitler, she was never arrested or formally investigated by the Allies. She died of a stroke on October 30th, 1949, at the age of 66 in Hanover. While Gurley's life ended tragically before the war even began, her brother Leo Raubal Jr. lived on to face the horrors of the global conflict and found himself caught in one of its most brutal turning points. Leo was born on October 2, 1906, in Linz, Austria. He was Angela's eldest son. Unlike his sister, who remained in the domestic sphere, Leo chose a different path. He pursued higher education, specializing in chemistry, and worked as a school teacher before the war. When World War II broke out, Leo was drafted into the German Luftwaffe, where he served as a lieutenant. His background in science led to a position in an airfield maintenance and logistics unit, rather than frontline combat. However, his military service still brought him into some of the most dangerous areas of the Eastern Front. In early 1943, during the intense and devastating Battle of Stalingrad, Leo was stationed with his unit in the region where he was captured by Soviet forces. The Soviets quickly realized his identity as Hitler's nephew and held him under special watch. Reports from Soviet records suggest that they briefly considered using Leo in a prisoner exchange, possibly trading him for Yakov Djugashvili, Joseph Stalin's son, who was a German prisoner at the time. But Stalin had refused such deals before, and Hitler showed no interest in negotiating for family. The idea was dropped. Leo remained in Soviet custody for the rest of the war. He was not kept in a standard POW camp. Instead, he was moved between different interrogation centers and treated as a high-value prisoner. Though never charged with crimes, he was considered politically sensitive. In 1945, after Germany's surrender, Leo was eventually released and allowed to return to Austria. He resumed civilian life in Linz, going back to teaching chemistry at a local technical school. Unlike many other relatives of Nazi figures, Leo avoided media attention and chose to live quietly. He never made public statements about Hitler, the war, or his imprisonment. There are no records of him participating in any political groups or post-war nationalist movements. He remained completely out of the spotlight until his death in 1977 at the age of 70. But while Leo Raubal Jr. had fought for Nazi Germany, another one of Hitler's nephews, William Patrick Hitler, fought against the Nazis from inside the United States Navy. William Patrick Hitler was born on March 12, 1911 in Liverpool, England. His father, Alois Hitler Jr., was Adolf Hitler's half-brother. William grew up in a modest home in Liverpool, far removed from the chaos unfolding in Germany during the early 20th century. In the early 1930s, as Adolf Hitler rose to power, William saw an opportunity. Hoping his family connection could secure him a high-paying job or promotion, he traveled to Germany in 1933. Initially, he was given small administrative roles at a bank, and later with an automobile company linked to the Nazi Party. But Adolf Hitler quickly grew suspicious of him. William was outspoken, bold, and seemed to use the family name for personal gain, something Adolf reportedly despised. Their relationship became tense. Adolf eventually told him to leave Germany. By 1938, William was back in London and gave a series of newspaper interviews exposing personal details about his uncle. He described Hitler as cold, paranoid, and deeply controlling. The Nazi regime was furious. Fearing retaliation, William and his mother fled England and arrived in the United States in 1939, just months before the war began. Once in America, William struggled at first to find work. But after the U.S. entered the war in 1941, he petitioned President Franklin D. Roosevelt for permission to enlist in the military. After background checks and security screenings, William was finally accepted into the U.S. Navy in 1944. He served as a hospital corpsman treating wounded soldiers and sailors during some of the war's bloodiest years. He was wounded in action and later awarded the Purple Heart for his service. His enlistment was seen as many as a public rejection of his uncle's ideology. After the war ended in 1945, William changed his last name to Stuart Houston to distance himself from the Hitler legacy. He married a German immigrant named Phyllis and settled in Patchogue, Long Island. There he ran a small medical laboratory and lived a quiet life, rarely speaking to the press. He had 4 sons and remained a U.S. citizen until his death in 1987. The sons, Alexander Adolf Stuart Houston, born in 1949, Louis, born in 1951, Howard, born in 1957, and Brian, born in 1965, lived far removed from any Nazi history or public connections to their infamous great-uncle. The Hitler surname was never used publicly or legally. The boys grew up in relative obscurity, attending local schools and living among neighbors who were largely unaware of their ancestry. But behind closed doors, they carried the heavy weight of their family's past. As they entered adulthood, each brother made the same private decision to never have children. According to several accounts, including statements from friends and distant relatives, the brothers made an informal agreement among themselves in the 70s. They would not pass on the bloodline or the name. They viewed it not as punishment, but as a responsibility to ensure that the Hitler family line would quietly vanish with them. Howard, the third of the brothers, was the only one who died young. In 1989, he was killed in a car accident at the age of 32. He had never married. The surviving brothers continued to live quiet lives, never seeking the spotlight. None of them have children or have ever confirmed any public record of marriage. They avoid interviews, television, and publications. Even after William's death in 1987, the family kept their silence. In later years, a few journalists attempted to locate and speak with them, but were either turned away or ignored. Alexander, the eldest, worked as a social worker and later operated a landscaping business with his younger brother Brian. Louis, the most private of the three, reportedly worked for a time in state government administration. To this day, the Stewart Houston brothers continue to live in the United States. Their precise locations are mostly unknown. They've never tried to profit from their family history. They've never appeared in documentaries or books, and they've never allowed the world to link them to Adolf Hitler beyond what history already knows. William and his family escaped Hitler's shadow, but his father, Alois Jr., remained in Europe, haunted by his past and surrounded by suspicion. Alois Hitler Jr. was born on January 13, 1882, in Vienna, Austria. He was the second son of Alois Hitler Sr., Adolf Hitler's father, from his second marriage. As a young man, Alois Jr. had a difficult relationship with his family and left home at the age of 14. Over the years, he drifted from job to job, moving between Austria, Germany, Ireland, and England, often getting involved in questionable business schemes. In 1909, while working as a waiter in Dublin, he met and married Bridget Dowling, an Irish woman from a middle-class family. Despite early signs of stability, Alois's reckless nature soon resurfaced. In 1914, he abandoned his wife and son and returned to Germany alone, where he faked his own death to avoid legal trouble. Bridget and William remained in England, believing he had died in the war. Back in Germany, Alois Jr. started a new life with another woman named Hedwig Heidemann, with whom he had a second son, Heinz Hitler. The marriage was later legitimized, but the circumstances around it added to his already stained reputation. Throughout the 1920s and early 1930s, Alois continued to face accusations of fraud, misrepresentation, and financial misconduct. Unlike other relatives of Adolf Hitler, he never held any official position in the Nazi Party, and it's unclear how much contact he had with his famous half-brother during Hitler's rise to power. Some reports suggest that Adolf kept his distance from Alois due to his unreliable behavior and criminal past. After the war, Alois was living in southern Germany. Because he played no real role in the Nazi government or military, the Allied forces did not arrest or interrogate him. However, he found himself completely isolated. The Hitler name was now a target, and his connection to Adolf, combined with his own shady past, left him distrusted by those around him. He attempted to live quietly in anonymity, but life was difficult. No official work, no friends, and no family support. He kept out of public view, and there are no records of him making public statements or defending his brother. He died on May 20th, 1956, at the age of 74. His death was barely noticed, and his grave remains unmarked. Now, his second son, Heinz, had fully embraced Hitler's regime. Raised entirely in Germany under the influence of Nazi ideology, Heinz had no connection to the British-Irish side of his family and lived a life that reflected total loyalty to the Third Reich. As a child, Heinz was enrolled in the Hitler Youth, the paramilitary youth organization created to train young Germans in Nazi ideals. He thrived in the program and was considered a model member. Unlike other relatives who kept their distance from Adolf, Heinz proudly carried the family name and embraced everything the Nazi Party stood for. By the time World War II began, Heinz had completed his education and joined the Wehrmacht as a signals technician. He was deployed to the Eastern Front, where the fighting was brutal and relentless. As a non-commissioned officer in a communications unit, he was responsible for maintaining military radio contact in active combat zones. In early 1942, during a Soviet counteroffensive near Moscow, Heinz was captured by the Red Army. His documents revealed who he was, and Soviet authorities quickly isolated him from other prisoners. Unlike ordinary POWs, Heinz was taken to Moscow for interrogation. The Soviets believed they could use him for propaganda or as leverage in a possible prisoner exchange. But Heinz didn't cooperate. Soviet records show that he refused to provide useful intelligence or speak against his uncle. His loyalty to Adolf Hitler and to the Nazi cause remained firm, even under pressure. According to reports, he was subjected to repeated beatings and psychological torture during months of imprisonment. Later that year, in 1942, Heinz died in Soviet custody. The exact date and location of his death remain unclear, but declassified Soviet documents confirmed he never left the prison alive. and was 21 years old. Heinz Hitler remains the only close blood relative to Adolf Hitler known to have died actively serving in the Nazi military. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Soviet territory. No family members ever retrieved his remains. While Hitler's bloodline faded, the symbols and sites of his power were also being wiped off the map. Berchtesgaden, located in the Bavarian Alps, had been one of Adolf Hitler's favorite retreats. His home there, the Burghof, was more than a residence. It was a symbol of power. From its balconies, Hitler entertained top Nazi officials, foreign diplomats, and close associates. He also used it as a planning base for many key wartime decisions. In the final weeks of the war, as the Allies closed in, Hitler ordered the destruction of many key Nazi sites to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. But the Berghof remained intact until April 25, 1945, when it was bombed by British Lancaster bombers from the Royal Air Force. The attack caused heavy damage, but some of the structure remained. When American troops from the 101st Airborne Division arrived days later, they found the area largely abandoned. Soldiers looted the ruins, collecting personal items, documents, and anything of value. Items like furniture, art, photographs, and even dishware were taken, some of which ended up in private collections or museums as war trophies. In 1952, under pressure from the Bavarian government and the Allied occupation authorities, the remaining ruins of the Berghof were destroyed with explosives. The goal was to eliminate any future possibility of the site becoming a neo-Nazi shrine. Other nearby buildings used by top Nazi leaders were also leveled, including homes belonging to Martin Bormann and Hermann Göring. By the 1960s, the rubble was buried under earth and trees. Today, only faint foundations remain. No memorials mark the location. Visitors to the area find a small path surrounded by forest, with no official sign of what once stood there. Other locations followed a similar path. The Führer bunker in Berlin was sealed off and covered with apartment buildings. The Nazi rally grounds in Nuremberg were repurposed or left to decay. Anything connected to Hitler personally, homes, offices, vacation spots, was either demolished or stripped of all markings. While this destruction focused on buildings and symbols, there was another group affected, one often overlooked: the children connected to Nazi families. Even those who had done nothing wrong found themselves marked for life. Many were taken from their families. Some were orphaned. Others were sent to re-education homes where they were taught democracy and anti-Nazi values. While Hitler's immediate relatives were few, children from his extended family or political circle ended up in these programs. Some were bullied, others hid their identity for the rest of their lives. There were no easy answers. These children hadn't committed crimes, but their names made them targets. And even as the years passed, the surviving family members had no desire to come together again. There were no family meetings, no attempts to restore the name, no public apologies or defenses. Most cut off contact with each other and disappeared into their own quiet lives. Some lived under fake names, others simply faded into the background. None of them ever tried to profit from their last name or speak up publicly. They understood that no one would ever forgive or forget their connection to Adolf Hitler. By the end of the 20th century, the Hitler name had nearly vanished. As of today, only a few distant relatives of Adolf Hitler are believed to be alive. They live quiet lives in the United States, far away from Europe. They don't do interviews. They don't write books. They don't profit from their history. They have chosen silence, and it's clear they want the world to move on.